as their planet exploded. The voyage would take 1,100 years, and with that they brought with them planets that they could use supplying their trip. One such planet would be what we would call today our moon. When they arrived in the solar system, they found these planets: our sun, Vulcan, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Melona, which they named, and then Mars, with the other outer planets such as Jupiter, Saturn, and the twin planets Uranus and Neptune, which have been mentioned highly in Babylonian texts of the Anunnaki. But of all these interior planets, the ones that they focused on mainly were Vulcan, Melona, and Mars. They locked the moon into a perfect orbit around Earth approximately 180,000 years ago. The population or inhabitants on the moon on arrival were about 9 billion people. These people lived under the lunar surface as well as on top in domes, which the Apollo missions have found on their trips to the moon. They did not colonize the Earth right away. They needed supplies, and so planet Vulcan was mined completely to dust. Melona was their primary target because the Earth already had a small population of humanoids on it. And so they populated Melona with their own people up to 80 million and colonized it. Mars, they colonized it with a smaller population of 5.5 million people. But on Melona, since it was so alike their home planet, their home world, they decided to go full force in mining, industrialization, city building, using all of their technologies that they brought with them in order to create a new civilization, a new second planet of their own. And so that's what they did. Their source of energy that they were using was geothermal energy. And geothermal energy is by tapping the magma core, the molten mantle, and then forcing water into it. And this is approximately how geothermal would work.
Hot fractured rock, or HFR, geothermal energy, is a renewable form of energy harnessed from the Earth itself at a depth of approximately 3.5 to 4 kilometers. Fractured granite found at this level is heated naturally by radiogenic decay from the elements within it. This heat is insulated by thousands of meters of sedimentary rocks and slowly builds up over millions of years. Injecting water under pressure into the granite, in the same way as the oil and gas industry, can widen the fractures. This hydraulic injection triggers tiny microseismic events that enhance the permeability of joints a significant distance away from the injection well, creating a geothermal reservoir. Low temperature water flows through the reservoir, increasing to approximately 280 degrees Celsius at 5,000 meters below the surface. Geodynamics uses a closed pipe circuit to bring the naturally hot pressurized fluid to the surface before running it through a heat exchanger that extracts the thermal energy. The cooled, pressurized fluid is injected back into the reservoir. The closed-loop system means the pressurized fluid is never exposed to air or light and does not diminish at all during the process, meaning zero water loss from the system. The superheated steam from the heat exchanger is used to drive a binary steam turbine in an adjacent power plant, thereby producing emission-free baseload electricity for supply to the national grid.
But within every city's quest for power, quest for electricity and expansion, they dug deeper and deeper wells, and more of them, until the surface of the planet started to crack. And when it cracked, the ocean flooded into these wells that were touching the magma, and the planet detonated. All those lives, 80 million people, vanished in a single second. The debris shifted Mars's orbit and orbited Mars for some time. The planet that we call Mars shifted into the orbit that is here today. So the planets that now we have are Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, and an asteroid belt, which even today people wonder about. And then we have Jupiter. This is our solar system today. Their main primary target after Melona was destroyed came Venus. This was a secondary target in which they decided to colonize, half underground, half on the surface. Again, using their technology, they were able to exist on Venus very comfortably. Right after World War II, there was an outcrop in the 1950s of massive photographs of UFOs. Some people actually claimed to have taken photographs of extraterrestrial visitors. These visitors coming in something called a beam ship from the planet Venus. These extraterrestrials were seen all over the nation. Many of them reached out and made contacts. One contactee during that time, in the 1950s, was Howard Minjur. He lived in Highbridge, New York, in 1955. After serving in World War II, he moved in with his father on his father's orchard in New York, and became nationally known and famous for being an extraterrestrial contactee. Taking with primitive photography equipment at that time, he was saying that he was being visited on a regular basis, if not every other month, by someone in silver clothing on a silver ship. During his national fame, he found a beautiful young blonde reporter, got married, and settled down to raise a family. At the time, he had a nice little repair shop, and also several groves around his house, his father's house, which he derived an income from. Through his contactee relationship, he made acquaintances with an Augustus C. Roberts, a former Air Force photographer, and was beginning to teach at a local college in photography. Throughout certain days in the spring or fall, Howard Minjur would have a potluck every Sunday, and he would invite people who had a contact with extraterrestrials. This became very famous, and many people would show up on an average Sunday just to have some potluck dinner, a glass of tea, and talk about their UFO experience. This is one of Augustus C. Roberts' photos, and in this photo there are 4 well-known extraterrestrials. These 4 extraterrestrials claim to have come from the planet Venus. They came in what was called a Victor 1 spacecraft, and the person that gave a speech at that get-together was known as Valiant Thor. All these photographs are Augustus C. Roberts' original photos, taken at that time in High Ridge, New York. Howard Minjur would go on to become and a UFO contactee, but a worker for the government in building experimental aircraft that would look and act and react just like UFOs.
That's why we like to be in Washington, D.C.
beautiful Washington, D.C. Come for the sights and stay for the UFOs. July of 1952 in Washington, D.C., a flock of UFOs seen here flew over the Capitol. These are not light anomalies. These are actual UFOs. Even Harry Truman commented that there are such things as UFOs.
At every conference that we had in the military. There's always things like that going on. Flying saucers, and we've had other things, you know.
7 years later, the exact same flock of UFOs flew over the Capitol building again and was photographed here. Other contactees, such as Reverend Frank Stranges, makes his statement clear that these are extraterrestrials and they are from the planet Venus.
Right, if they're from outer space, where are they possibly from? The information that I've been given by Commander Valiant Thor from the interior of the planet Venus is that practically every planet in our system and other systems are populated with people from other worlds. Only the majority of them live on the interior of the planet. Now, my research up until 1959 was confined to the nuts and bolts of UFOs. And then I had an experience that changed my life forever. As a minister, as a pastor of a church at that time and full-time evangelist, I would go from church to church and I would show pictures of UFOs on a board. These were black and white pictures, very few in color. And I'd be able to explain to the audience thus and so and thus and so. Time, date, place, witnesses, names, addresses, everything. But then I received a telephone call at my home in Irvington, New Jersey, a call from a former Air Force photographer by the name of August C. Roberts. And Augie gets on the phone and he said, "Dr. Frank, guess what?" I said, "What?" He said, "I met a man from another planet." I said, "What have you been smoking?" He said, "Do you want to hear this or not?" I said, "Yes, please, please." "Where did you see him?" He said, "Not only did I see him, I took his picture." I said, "Fine. What makes you think he's from outer space? And where was this?" He said, "At the Lawn UFO lecture at the home of Howard Minjur in Highbridge, New Jersey." I said, "That's interesting. What makes you think he's from outer space?" "Well," he said, "Frank, when he looked at me, I got the distinct impression he could look straight through me." I said, "My father does that to me now." He said, "Come on now, you want to hear this?" "Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead." "What else?" He said, "Well, the man could speak every known language and dialect on the face of the earth." He said there were people at that convention from foreign countries, and he could speak to them, including to some people from Africa. He spoke in their dialect. I said, "Well, that's interesting." I said, "What else?" He said the guy had no fingerprints. Oh, that interested me. As a former special investigator, I know the science of fingerprinting. Everybody has fingerprints. He said his tips of his fingers were as bald as a boiled egg. I said, "Is that right?" That interested me. I said, "All right, I'll take the pictures. I'll put them on the board at the universities, colleges, and churches that I address on the subject, and I'll say this is what Augie Roberts said," which I did. I was invited to Washington, D.C. to a church pastored by Dr. John Mears, a congregation of about 2,000 people. I put the pictures of this man, I didn't know his name, on the board and told people, "This is a picture of a man who claims to be from another planet." And the picture was taken by Augie Roberts, an Air Force photographer. And all I know about him is what I'm telling you today. He stands about 6 foot tall, weighs about 180 pounds, 185 pounds. And this is what he looked like a normal human being. And I had this picture up on the board. At the end of my presentation, I was signing autographs to my first book, which was called Saucerama, and people were coming along the platform, and I was just signing and signing, and a lady comes to the platform. And they teach you in seminary, you've got to be nice to the ladies, especially in church. And she says to me, "Dr. Strange?" I said, "Strangers." She said, "I've got to see you alone." Oh boy. I said, "Ma'am, can you wait just I got a couple of hundred more books to sign here. I've got to see you now. And she was irritated at me. And she straightened up and reached into her purse, and she produced out of her purse an ID card that said United States Government, something similar to this. United States Government, Pentagon Building, Department so-and-so, room number so-and-so. On the other side was her photograph with a number beneath her photograph. I was converted immediately. I asked the pastor to borrow his key to his office. This lady wanted to talk to me. He said, yeah, okay. And he gives me the key. As we started to leave the platform, we passed the photograph of this stranger from another planet, and she points to him. She said, how would you like to meet him personally? Well, what would you say? My Father in heaven. I said, of course. Where is he? She said, at the Pentagon. I said, oh, my Father. If the government was going to pull a fast one on frank strangers, that would be the place to do it, at the Pentagon. Well, walked into the pastor's office. She pointed her finger. I don't know why they always point their finger at my nose. She said, can you, as a former special investigator, still follow instructions? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, to the letter, yes, ma'am. She said, you meet me downstairs in front of your hotel at 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow morning, and I'll take you to where he is. I said, at the Pentagon? She said, mm-hmm. Her name was Nancy Warren. I didn't get much sleep last night. When I talked to my parents, I didn't tell them about that on the phone. 8 o'clock tomorrow, the following morning, I was down there on the cold sidewalk. I was down there at 7:30. And it was cold that December. It started to snow. And here, her car pulls up. She opens the door. She said, good morning, brother. I said, good morning. Got in the car. She started driving toward the Pentagon. Now, if you're familiar with the Pentagon traffic, the flow of traffic goes to the left and then to the right. She turns to the left abruptly, pulls up against the fence. There was a security guard there with a tablet. He looked at her. He went like that. He looked at me. He went like this. Naturally, I went right back to him. Got out of the car, fastened my coat. She reached into her purse and took out her ID, opened her little coat and suit jacket, and she pinned her ID on her blouse. As we got in line, people from the military, people in plain clothes, all in one line, and a guard who was getting taller and taller as closer as I got to him. And I said, Nancy, I don't have any ID on my shirt or anyplace else. She said, just do what I do. I said, what are you going to do? She said, get back in line, will you? Which I did. And she walked in front of the security guard, and she opened her jacket like this. And then walked right on by him. And that put me first in line. And behind me was a military man, and I hesitated. He cleared his throat. What did I do? I walked by the security guard, went like that. Expecting to be grabbed by the neck. Wise guy, what are you trying to do here? Nothing happened. I caught up with Nancy. She said, fine, that was very good. She said, we have one more. I said, one more what? She said, one more security guard. And sure enough, another lineup, another security guard. I was third in line. I kept looking at my empty pocket. I was second in line. Then I was first in line. She walked in front of me, opened her jacket, walked on by. I didn't even look at his face. I just went like that and walked on by. He never stopped me. Walked down the corridor, turned to the right. At the very corner office, that was the office part of the building that was demolished because of that plane crash some years ago. And here is an office door, no number, no description. She said, he's in there. I said, well, thank you very much. I had my hand on the doorknob and she started to walk away. I suddenly spun around and said to her, how do I get out of here? She said, oh boy, my God. You're some investigator. She said, do the same thing as when you came in. Open your jacket. But make sure you get behind someone. I said, okay. And it worked the second time. Now, here my hand is on the doorknob. I open the door slowly. Straight in front of me, two flat-top desks, two Air Force officers writing. In the far corner to the right was a sergeant, Air Force sergeant. He was busy typing. I cleared my throat 2 or 3 times. They paid me no mind whatsoever. Paid no attention. I opened the door behind me, shut it again. They didn't know I was there. And then my attention was distracted when I saw something moved to my right behind me, and here is this man coming toward me, 6 foot tall, about 185 pounds, soft, wavy brown hair, brown eyes, with his hands stretched out, whose picture I've been carrying for several years around the world. Here's a man from another planet. He said, "Hello, Frank, how are you?" How did he know my name? We had a marvelous half-hour conversation. I'll show you his picture on the screen in a few moments. I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from your planet that your Bible calls the morning and the evening star." I said, "Venus?" He said, "Yes, the inside of Venus." I said, "How did you get here?" He said, "I came in a saucer craft which is called Victor 1. Now, speaking of Victor 1, I have a beautiful painting, a big poster of Victor 1 that I want every one of you to take a look at when you go to my table. And there's another big chart, which is the Starship, which is presently 100 miles in a fixed orbit. I want you to take one of those, either one of those, free of charge. Now, what do you think about that? As long as they last. Take them as long as they last, okay? Now, I said, "What is your name?" He said, "Commander Valiant Thor." He said, "You call me Val." I said, "Thank you." And how long have you been here? 3.5 years, this coming March 16th of 1960. And what have you been doing here? He said, "I've been conversing with the President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and Mr. Nixon, who I met personally some years afterward, and several members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." He said, "I brought a gift for them. And this gift was in my hands, and I looked into the eyes of Mr. Eisenhower. I said, this information will do away with sickness, disease, and even death in the United States, and then you can share it with other nations." Gave it to the President. President Eisenhower received this information. It took them over 1 year to get back to the commander. He was their guest for 3 years at the Pentagon. And 1 year later, the President came back, met with the commander again, with this information in his hands. Shaking his head, he said, "I'm sorry, we cannot accept this information because it will ruin the economy of the United States."
In his book, Stranger at the Pentagon by Frank Stranges, he describes in detail a Victor 1 spacecraft, its occupants being Valiant Thor, Don Thor, Vice Commander, and Jill Thor. This is a photograph of Don Thor, the Vice Commander. Jill Thor, Don Thor, and Valiant Thor were the 3 major contactees that day at High Ridge. Valiant gave a small speech claiming that he was from Venus and that there needs to be intergalactic relations brought to the human race via the Pentagon or the President or the Vice President, who was Dwight D. Eisenhower at the time, and Vice President Richard M. Nixon. That day at High Ridge was a landmark where humans actually reached out and could touch an extraterrestrial being. Valiant Thor and his ships, and in the book of Frank Strange's Stranger at the Pentagon, describes in complete detail the Victor 1 spacecraft. The Victor 1 spacecraft, there would be 249 Victor 1s scanning the entire surface of the Earth, watching the human species evolve and educate themselves. This video was seen outside of Moscow in Russia of a Victor 1 spacecraft, identical to the drawings and descriptions of Reverend Frank Strange's. In Japan in 2010, this UFO, this Victor 1 spacecraft with this cloaking device, is just outside of an airport, like the ancient Vimana could turn invisible as well. But the Victor 1s continue to appear. Right after and just before the tsunami in 2011 in Japan, there were several Victor 1 spacecrafts assigned to that area to monitor the destruction or the debris field created by the tsunami. In this amateur video seen here, there are 4 Victor 1s monitoring the debris field just after the tsunami in Japan. This is no trick of light. These are not balloons or lanterns. These are actual Victor 1 craft in that area. But where are they today? If they're not monitoring our Earth, where are the motherships that have been around for 200,000 years in our solar system, watching the other planets, if not harvesting materials in our solar system? The best estimate that we can give you is from NASA, the SOHO satellite. In 2011, large objects were seen in the corona of our sun. This is our sun depicted here from the actual SOHO satellite with objects that are Earth size. If there are motherships still in our solar system for the past 200,000 years, they should show up on our satellites. Seen here in the NASA SOHO satellite in 2011 as that monitors our sun, we have seen some anomalous objects that were orbiting our sun. They're large objects the size of our Earth. They are still around our sun. These are motherships, our entire complexes with billions of people in them. They're still here, monitoring our sun, our planet, our solar system. These are extraterrestrial visitors. But is this really our solar system? And is this really our sun? If they're here to help. They're here to monitor. And they have the technology. Maybe we should listen.